Good evening. I'm Stephen Knapp. I'm an author and writer of numerous books on spirituality, Vedic culture, specifically the traditions of India. And for those of you that would like to know more about me and much of the information that I've written about, or the traditions of India in general, you can go to my website at www.stephen-knapp.com and find out quite a bit of information. It's grown to be a pretty big site that can assist you in your spiritual development and otherwise. Tonight I'd like to give a presentation reading from the Vedic description of the soul, a presentation I've made on who am I, or who are you, who are we all. Anyway, who am I? What am I? Am I the body, mind, or something more? These are the age-old questions that every philosopher throughout the ages has tried to grasp and understand. After all, how will you know what to do in life if you do not even know who and what you really are? However, the ancient Vedic literature of India has provided the clearest answers to these questions that have been found yet. For example, the Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.9 explains that the living being is the soul, and that, quote, the soul is atomic in size and can be perceived by perfect intelligence. This atomic soul is situated within the heart and spreads its influence all over the body of the embodied living entities. When the soul is purified from the contamination of the 5 kinds of material air, its influence is then exhibited. The Chandogya Upanishad also says, 6.11.3, that although the body withers and dies within the self, or when the self or soul leaves it, the living self does not die. Further enlightenment is given in the Srimad Bhagavatam, wherein it explains that the spirit soul has no death and is eternal and inexhaustible. He is completely different from the material body, but because of being misled by the misuse of slight independence, which are decision-making processes for whatever we want to do, he is obliged to accept subtle and gross bodies created by the material energy, and thus be subjected to so-called material happiness and distress. The eternal nature of the self is also explained in Bhagavad Gita by Lord Sri Krishna, where he specifically says that there was never a time when he did not exist, nor any of the living beings, including you. Nor shall any of us cease to be in the future. The embodied soul continually passes from boyhood to youth to old age in this body. Similarly, the soul enters another body at the time of death. But for one who is self-realized, there is no bewilderment by such a change. In other words, there's nothing to fear from the death or rebirth process. It is further explained that we should know that which pervades the entire body by consciousness is indestructible. No one is able to destroy the imperishable soul. Only the material body of the living entity is subject to destruction. For the soul there is never birth nor death, nor having once been does he ever cease to be. He is unborn, undying, and eternal. He is not slain when the body dies or is killed. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, similarly, the soul accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. Certainly this knowledge can relieve anyone from the anxiety that comes from thinking that our existence is finished at the time of death. Spiritually we do not die, yet the body is used until it is no longer fit to continue. At that time it may appear that we die, but that is not the case. The soul continues on its journey to another body according to its destiny. The indestructibility of the soul is also explained. The individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble, and can be neither burned nor dried. The soul is everlasting, unchangeable, and eternally the same. Knowing this, we should not grieve for the temporary body. So, the body dwindles and dies, but the soul does not die. It simply changes bodies. Therefore, the body is like a shirt or coat that we wear for some time, just like this one that I have. And when it is worn out, we change it for a new one. Therefore, the Vedic literature, such as the Chandogya Upanishad 8.1.1, mentions that knowledge of the self within is what should be sought and understood by all. Why? Because realizing one's spiritual identity solves the problems and mysteries of life. The more we realize our spiritual identity, the more we will see that we are beyond these temporary material bodies, and that our identity is not simply being a white body or black body or yellow body or fat, skinny, intelligent, dumb, young, old, strong, weak, or blind, etc. That's not our real identity. Real blindness means not being able to see through the temporary and superficial bodily conditions and into the real person within. Seeing reality means to recognize the spiritual nature of everyone. The Srimad Bhagavatam 11:28-35 also explains that the soul is self-luminous, beyond birth and death, and unlimited by time or space, and therefore beyond all change. The Bhagavatam 11:22-50 also points out that as one witnesses the birth and death of a tree and is separate from it, similarly the witness of the birth, death, and various activities of the body is within but separate from it. Kind of like driving a car. We are within it, but we're still separate from it. And whatever happens to the car doesn't necessarily mean it's happening to us. The Katha Upanishad relates that within the body, higher than the senses and the sense objects, exists the mind. More subtle than the mind is the intelligence, and higher and more subtle than the intellect is the self. That self is hidden in all beings and does not shine forth on its own, but is seen by subtle seers through their sharp intellect. In other words, by analysis, we can detect the existence of the soul. Just as I'm talking and speaking in front of you now. Why? Because there's a soul within. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible. From this we can understand that within the gross physical body, which is composed of material elements such as earth, air, water, etc., there is also the subtle body composed of the finer subtle elements of mind, intelligence, and false ego. Some people call this the ghostly body. The psychic activities takes place within this subtle body. It is also within the subtle body wherein existence of past memories and past lives exist, however deep they may be, within the subconscious. Yet the living being has his spiritual form that is deeper than this subtlety. Otherwise, he could not have repeated births. A person actually sees his spiritual self as well as the presence of the Supreme Being when he perceives that both the gross and subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure spiritual self within. Therefore, it could be asked that since we are separate from the gross and subtle bodies, why do we so strongly identify with this material body? It is explained that though the material body is different from the soul, it is because of the ignorance due to material association that one falsely identifies oneself with the high or low bodily conditions. It is further elaborated that because of the mind and ego that we experience material happiness and distress. Yet in actuality, the spirit's soul is above such material existence and can never really be affected by material happiness and distress in any circumstance. A person who truly perceives this has nothing to fear from material creation or the appearance of births and deaths. Thus he can attain real peace. The Chandogya Upanishad 8:1 verses 5 and 6 goes on to explain that the self is free from sin and old age, death and grief, hunger and thirst, lamentation and sadness, and all forms of bodily identification. It desires only what it ought to desire and imagines nothing but what it ought to imagine. Those who depart from this life without having discovered the self and those true and spiritual desires have no freedom in all the worlds. But those who depart from here after realizing one's genuine spiritual identity and those spiritual inclinations have freedom in all the worlds. So to summarize, the soul is a particle of consciousness and bliss in its purified state of being. It's just a matter of reaching that purified state. It is not material in any way. It is what departs from the body at the time of death and, in the subtle body, carries its mental impressions, desires, and tendencies, along with the karmic results of its activities from one body to another. To understand and perceive this self, which is our genuine spiritual identity, is the real goal of life. Such a realization relieves one of further material existence. As it is explained, those who have purified their consciousness, becoming absorbed in spiritual knowledge and absolving any impurities in the mind, are liberated from karma that frees them from any future births. They are free from any more births in the material world and are delivered to the spiritual atmosphere, the spiritual dimension. How to do this is the ultimate accomplishment of human existence. So I hope you've gotten a little bit out of that. And for those that, since this is a deep topic, for those of you that are interested, you can go to my website at www.stephen-knapp.com, and I have a number of different books and articles that are available for you to pursue this study further. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you again sometime. Thank you. Namaste.